This is The Fix with me, Karima, and we now take a look at the front pages of weekend papers and what made news headlines this week with political and social commentator Khaya Sithole. Khaya, thank you so much for giving up your Sunday morning to come and analyse the papers for us. I looked at the City Press and it has quite a suggestive headline. It says, Cyril gears up for war. And of course, the story is about the investigation into the president's campaign funds by the public protector. What do you make of the story, and what do you make specifically of the headline? Is the headline backed up by the information that's in that story?
Yeah, the headline is very provocative, and I think you probably think they may have, that line, yes. But they didn't cross it because I think they do say that there is an expectation now that there will be an adverse finding against the president. And of course, then it's a question of how does it then launch a fight-back campaign? Does it then take this for a review, and what are the consequences going to be? And of course, the big problem there is that if it does take this for a review, it then enables anyone who's going to be taking an interest in that matter to have full access to the entire record of what the public protector had in her possession when she applied her mind. And of course, this might then give insight into exactly where that 400 million rand in collective donations came from. I don't think that's the type of terrain that the president wants to traverse at this particular point in time. So he literally now has to take the option of saying, I will accept the adverse findings and then comply with whatever remedial action that the public protector recommends. Of course, in this instance, because he's an implicated person, the remedial action would have to be something that has to be executed by Parliament in one way or another. And unfortunately, as you know, our Parliament, it has this wonderful habit of protecting its presidents when the public protector says particular things need to be done. So I think what Parliament would have to try and do is to find a way to implement whatever remedial action in a way that doesn't give leverage for the EFF or the DA to then say to the Constitutional Court, we feel that the remedial action that Parliament has applied to the president, whatever it might be, hasn't gone enough, because we've seen how that happened in the Jacob Zuma years. So it's going to be a very difficult few weeks for the president as soon as the report is released. It doesn't help, of course, that the other people involved are people like Gavin Watson, and it simply just says, I am the president of the country. I'm part of a headline that involves somebody called Gavin Watson. How did we end up here?
What is interesting about the story, of course, is that the public protector in this instance has become part of the factional battles that's playing itself out in the African National Congress and its alliance. We've seen the public protector saying she's going to take Solly Mapaela to court. The SACP hit back saying they're ready for court action. And of course, a lot of social justice organizations questioning the office of the public protector, or rather the person in the office of the public protector and her fitness to hold office. The DA has a motion on the table to look into her fitness. The ANC has apparently asked the DA to remove it because they don't want to support an opposition one. They want to bring one themselves. What do you think is going to happen to the public protector? She's adamant that she's going to stay.
So the big problem that we have, unfortunately, is that it does appear that she has somehow found herself caught into the vortex of ANC factional politics, whether it's something purely accidental in the case that some people simply look at what she's investigating and then use it to support whatever their own agenda is, or if it's something that she herself looks at what the prevailing political climate is and seeks to respond to that. We'll never know. But unfortunately, she's far too caught up in the vortex of ANC politics at this stage. Now, the big question is that when she then does issue her reports, are we now in this paradigm where absolutely nobody's going to take it seriously because one faction will say, well, we knew you were going to do that because you're fighting against our person, and another faction will be like, oh, well, we're not going to undermine the office of the public protector, and then only for her to release another report later on that seems to appeal to another faction, and then for them to change tack. So it's really become a very dangerous space. Solly Mapaela is probably going to be in trouble for the way he's conducted himself, but we're going to have to see what happens.
Absolutely. Let's go to the Sunday World, where the ANC Treasurer General, Mr. Paul Mashatile, is saying that he is taking the EFF leader, Julius Malema, to court for defamation. And it all, of course, centers around allegations of corruption in Alexandra. Now, several people have taken the EFF to court, including myself, by the way, and I won against them. Trevor Mandel won against them. The EFF has used defaming people and slander as a tactic. And of course, in the world of Twitter and so on, you don't have to kind of bring the papers and prove yourself and so on. Do you think this is another instance where Mr. Malema might be hit over the knuckles by the court?
So the difficult thing here is that, again, we know political rhetoric does tend to, border on the line of saying, well, actually, would a normal person saying this thing be accepted? But again, in political circles, people sort of tend to push the envelope a bit further. I think what the EFF is probably struggling with now is, do they actually have an understanding themselves or how far they can go without actually exposing themselves to the issues of litigation? And I think that's something they need to take a step back and say, guys, this is how far you can go without actually that type of legal exposure which they seem to be subjecting themselves to now. So it's a learning process, I think.
Precisely. So it's kind of back to the drawing board about tactics. So is this kind of tactic yielding the results, or is it landing us in hot water? I mean, do you think the EFF has the capacity for that kind of introspection?
I do think that they've got the ability to take a step back and say, guys, obviously we now have all these losses in the courts. This is not ideal. We quite simply cannot afford to be wasting money, losing court cases. So let us go and re-strategize and sort of then frame the message around particular issues and then say this is how far we can go without going overboard, and then perhaps have a couple of people, 2 or 3, who are responsible for really driving that particular rhetoric. Because now if you have everybody getting carte blanche to say whatever they're going to say, there's going to be the possibility that somebody will go too far. But it's never that person who's a problem. It's the EFF that enabled that environment. So they need to be able to identify a couple of people that say you are responsible for what we might call as the borderline messages, and then we'll be able to defend it because there's a singular, a reference point, there's a singular talking point. But right now, even in this Mashatile case, Mandisa Mashriho is actually quite prominent in the conversation because she's the one that referred to the Maile and Mashatile as thugs who really bankrupted the Alexander Renewal Project.
And we know Mr. Maile is doing the same thing.
Yeah, so again, it's now a question of, did they actually apply their minds before and then say, look, we feel that we are justified in saying this because, of course, truth is an absolute defense to slander and defamation. So perhaps if they've got the documents and they've got the resources to actually prove that what they're saying is justifiable, then it'll be fine. But I do think that it probably needs to be something that is better coordinated in the future. You're not going to stop them from engaging in political rhetoric. They are a political party. It's just a matter of managing that so that you do not cross over into the legal exposure where they've been over the past couple of weeks.
And have lost. Let's go to the Sunday Times. The Sunday Times, of course, talks about Cape Town as the world's most dangerous city. And it's essentially saying that the city is run by a set of underworld figures, from bouncers to people who run guns, who smuggle drugs, who traffic people, and that there is no grip on the situation. And the blame game continues. Who's responsible? Is it national? Is it provincial? Khaya, people are dying in Khayelitsha, people are dying in Mitchell's Plain, people are dying in Pontieville. The government of the Western Cape, have they responded adequately to the situation?
Evidently not, because I think how you measure the adequacy of any government's response is when people who are actually the electorate start feeling that there is some improvement into their living conditions. And I think in South Africa we know very well that there is this parallel world run by these underworld mafias. We used to think it was just, radical gangs with guns, but unfortunately, even when you look at institutions like Bosasa, it seems to be far more institutionalized. I think what we need
But there's a meeting point. It's as if the state and corrupt official provides the bridge for the illicit economy and the economy to be joined together, and that's effectively happened in the Western Cape. And the role of the state
is supposed to be the opposition. It's supposed to be the bulwark where it defends people against these things. But unfortunately, in far too many instances, you're seeing people that are in the civil service, whether it's the police, whether it's the Metro Police, for example, becoming the enablers by either not acting fast enough or themselves being on the take. And I think that is the biggest problem that we have as a country. We need to have a wholesale cultural shift in really all these accountability systems, whether it's the justice system, whether it's the police service, for them to be seen as the primary defenders of society, because that then at least means people can trust them and they can say that I can report this gang and I know that nobody's going to go and snitch on me and say that this was the person that actually exposed who you are. And unfortunately, the Western Cape probably represents the worst of what we can refer to as the gang-related crimes.
Khaya, that is where we will leave it. Thank you very much for joining us. There's a fantastic piece written by Thuli Madunsela that you've got to check out in the City Press. We ran out of time. Go have a read. That's your fix for the week. Goodbye and take care.